Sunday morning. Welcome. Now here's the thing, I have an important assignment to describe before we get started, and not everyone's here. So we're going to see a great act of community this morning. You're all going to have to quietly and at an appropriate time explain to your neighbor, who will come in a few minutes, what you're about to be instructed to help me with. All right? Under your chairs and or around, there are pieces of twine. You will find a piece of twine somewhere near you, and if you don't, we will pass out more and get you one. Bleachers might need twine. Do we have twine over on the bleachers? All right, we have twine people. And your assignment is that over the next few hours and before noon, you get to fiddle and tie and weave your twine into a nice little knot of your own, but a knot that can be combined with the person next to you, and the person next to them, and the person next to them, and on and on and on, until at noon, we have one huge knot of knots that you have all created for me to make a point later. But you have engaged with your hands, which is an important aspect of the work of the Land Institute, and I think you all need to do it today. Now I will say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go from your right to your left. So the people on the right need to weave fastest. You need to weave the fastest, and you need to, yes, do you need a twine? It's coming. It's coming. Twine is coming. Is the twine coming? Okay. From the right to the left, you'll have to go fastest. Make some knots, tie it, work it until you're satisfied with it. And then pass it to the person next to you, and they will tie yours onto theirs, and so on. And then we'll also move from the back to the front. Balcony, you can just drop your knot at the end when you're done. Just don't hit anyone on the head. All right? So this person over here with the hat is going to be dropping everyone's knot down when you're done. And then and then you in the back, you're going to pass your knot up. And the bleachers, you can figure it out, just pass it in. But it needs to be a big, huge knot, right? We're going to tangle it, and it's going to be knotted, okay? All right. I am so pleased to introduce our first group for you today. You have to also do it silently. This is a contemplative thing. It's all about you. And you can explain it to your neighbor without talking too. I dare you to try. First up this morning, we have a wonderful engagement. You're going to hear some introductory music by our friend Bill Vitek, who is not with us today, but I'm sure is watching on the live stream. So hi, Bill. And Stan Cox, a fellow here at the Land Institute who's been with us since 2000, has had many roles as a plant breeder, is one of the smartest people I know. He's in this fellow position, which is a position where he gets to sort of explore the outer reaches of the ecosphere. to help us engage out beyond agriculture with the crisis and the debacle that we're dealing with today, so that we can have a broader understanding and bring that into our work. Stan definitely has the courage to be uncomfortable and continues to stretch himself and us all in interesting ways. And he has the courage to tell the truth in a way that can be mightily discomforting. I'm sure some of you have read his books. He's been doing that for a long time. And he has the courage to invite folks like Alexia Leclercq, almost, who is also working in the discomfort on the daily with their work that will be described by the two of them in conversation. I want to make the connection between what you're going to hear here and this project in real time that also includes art by Preeti Cox. You can see it over in the tent over yonder, so if you find yourself wondering on your way out, please stop. It's still there, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So with that, I invite you to muster the courage for this morning and to join these two in the truth and the discomfort of it. Stan, Alexia.
Do we have the music? Mic's on? Okay. Good to see everyone this morning. Thanks for hanging on. I think you're going to be glad that you did. As Tim said yesterday in his excellent talk, that the work we're doing here is going to be essential whichever way things go. If the climatic and political situations both are, if we manage to turn those around, then our work will be needed. And if it goes the other way, as he said, it'll be even more needed. And what we're doing here today is also discussing in the broader movements for climate justice and environmental justice. How are they going to navigate the potentially perilous years and months and years that we've got lying ahead of us? In this series, in real time, I've been talking to people in the on-the-ground climate and environmental justice movements about this, what they're doing now and how they're planning to deal with what's coming on, and all of that has been at a distance up to now over the past 6 months when I've been doing this. So this is the first face-to-face opportunity that I've had to speak with somebody, and this is one that I thought I'd want all of you to share in, because I think you're going to really like what we're doing here. Alexia Leclercq, good to have you here. Before we get into what you're doing now and start empowerment and COP27, I'd like to go back to the work you've been doing. I should say Alexia's from Austin, Texas, and I'd like to go back to the work you have done with Poder in Austin, especially dealing with marginalized communities living along the east bank of the river there, and some of the campaigns, and of course, including Tesla.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute honor to be in this beautiful place with all these incredible people and so much knowledge about perennial agriculture. So my name's Alexia, and I come from Austin, and I got started in organizing in middle school with Poder. It stands for People Organized in Defense of Earth and Her Resources, and it was an organization founded in 1991 by some of the community members. So just to give you a little historical background in Austin, like many cities in the United States, is pretty segregated due to the redlining, and so East Austin was where the Black and brown community lived, and it was also zoned industrial. So we had these toxic tank farms, we had the Holly power plant, and all of that was causing extremely high rates of cancer and respiratory disease in the community. And a bunch of community members came together and started organizing to fight these, these industries. And so they came together, they started petitioning, they started talking to the media, they went door to door, they went to city council members, they started hosting toxic tours for these politicians coming in to see the conditions that community members are living in. And they were actually incredibly successful. They kicked out 6 major oil corporations out of East Austin. So it's been an absolute honor to, learn from my elders, my boss, Susana Almanza. And so I think after some of these major wins, sadly, the issue continues. And so I came in and started doing work in 2019 with them. And we've been dealing with some of the pollution from the aggregate mining operations that are in the eastern side of Travis County, which is where Austin is located in. And then recently, we've been dealing with issues with water rights, lack of access to clean and affordable water. There's a private water company that's been charging families around $400 to $500 a month, which is ridiculous. And then we most recently have been doing some work with Tesla coming in, and that's been a really interesting journey because, as you all know, Tesla produces electric vehicles, but there's actually a very high local cost to the gigafactory, and a lot of the community members have been feeling it, things from like dust and truck traffic, and then Tesla's gigafactory is also in a flood zone, which is going to be potentially causing future issues that we have yet to see, but given that they just recently started operating, it's going to be interesting to kind of see how that plays out. And so we continue, building different campaigns around different environmental issues and also work a lot on local legislation. Recently, we passed policy that helps protect some of the creeks on the east side, which do not have the same protection as creeks on the west side. And so that's where a lot of my bulk of my work is about.
And you mentioned that y'all had also been working in just public transportation issues. What's the situation there in Austin with public transportation?
Yeah, so one thing that we really advocate and push for is obviously a just transition, away from the fossil fuel industry. And as part of that solution, Austin is actually building a new metro system. So Austin's public transport is not very well built out, and that's one of the things that they wanted to improve. However, their new metro costs $7 a ride. Which is very expensive, and their bus right now is at $275, so that's a huge jump. And so one thing that we really center is that just part of a transition, right? You can't just transition and leave low-income communities behind. And so that's one thing that we've been doing a lot of petition around. We've been talking to Cap Metro and got them to reconsider some of their prices, but there's still a couple lines that they're still not sure what their price is going to be. So that's something that we really push for. And a lot of our kind of campaigns are really driven by what the community needs at the moment. We don't have a beautifully laid out 10-year plan. It's really kind of what comes up and what the neighbors are telling us in the neighborhood groups. And so that is definitely part of the issue. And we also really see the interconnection of, environmental justice and different social justice issues.
It seems to me that one thing that the environmental justice movement accomplishes is to demonstrate how too often the mainstream climate movement focuses on technological fixes to try to kind of spruce up the current socioeconomic system to supposedly decarbonize it and make it, keep it going in kind of the same mechanisms that got us into trouble in the first place. But is that part of why you're focused on environmental justice as well as climate?
Yeah, I think the environmental justice movement was actually really born out of, communities of color and low-income communities being completely neglected from the mainstream conservation and environmental movement, and their lives and their exposure to pollution wasn't really taken into account because they felt like it was just such a small piece. And so some of these big green organizations perpetuated a lot of racism, and even with the building of the national park displaced a lot of indigenous people. And so the environmental justice movement really is rooted in indigenous knowledge, and part of that is knowing that we actually do have the answers, and there's a lot of ancestral knowledge and indigenous science that can guide us towards creating sustainable futures. And so one term that has been in the news a lot that we've been kind of talking about is false solutions, and it's kind of an umbrella term to describe some of these newer technologies. One of them, for example, is carbon capture and sequestration. And the problem with these so-called solutions is that they're not actually addressing the root of the issue. They're not actually calling for us to reduce, our carbon footprint and the fossil fuel industry. It's just thinking about different ways, for example, capturing the carbon and storing it underground, and then the communities that are going to be impacted are going to be those that are most marginalized. And so as these new technologies develop, we're not necessarily against new technology, but we have a lot of questions as to, who's profiting off of them, who's going to be impacted by them, and are we actually really, targeting the root of the issue? Are we actually shifting away from the fossil fuel industry, or is this just another, technology that's going to help the fossil fuel industry continue to make profit, or tech companies continue to make profit while local communities are still impacted?
And regarding the work, not just in Austin, but generally you've said that the commodification of land is underlying, literally in this case, underlying the environmental justice and climate crises. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so one of the things, so actually in my undergrad degree, I got to read a lot of critical theory, which was really cool, and kind of look at the history behind the climate crisis, right? I feel like a lot of us don't know how we got here or what to do about it. And I think it's really important to understand the whole process of industrialization and the creation of this system that, in capitalism, that we prioritize profit making over the lives of people, the well-being of the planet, and the well-being of others. And part of that is we've completely commodified land. And I think a lot of us, myself included, have been very disconnected from the land that we live on. And we see it as something that can be exploited, that can be used for profit, that one person owns or another person owns. That's kind of gotten us to where we are, right? Because companies, right, they just buy land, they just exploit land, and we don't have that connection. We don't care for the land like a lot of indigenous people across the world have for centuries and centuries. And I think that is one of the core causes of the climate crisis. And so that's something that I've kind of been studying and looking into about how do we actually teach youth and community members of all ages to reconnect with the land to have that, different value and that relationship with the land that'll allow us to not just see it as something to be used.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the Land Institute, so you've got a friendly audience here. If we discuss more recent development, you and your colleagues started the group Start Empowerment, and so we like to hear some about how that happened. I know part of it is that you saw that the mainstream movement, there were things that were being left unaddressed. But part of that I see is the Climate Justice Community School. And I'd like to read from, but before Alexia describes that, I was going to read from the website what they say about the Community Justice Climate School. Here at CJCS, we don't have fellows, we have vanguards. Historically, youth have been at the forefront of events that have changed the face of history. For us, Vanguard is an aspirational name in that we hope to help in fostering the next generation of conscious climate activists, organizers, scholars, advocates, one in which will catapult society forward as the generations before them have. I like the sound of that, and it's good to have ambition in it, but it sounds great. So anyway, just generally about Start Empowerment and the school.
Yeah, so I co-founded Start Empowerment alongside my co-founder here in 2019. So I actually attended this exposition called the Wallerstein Exposition in New York City, and they had hundreds of environmental educational programs. They were tabling, and all of them were really great, but all of them focused on the environmental science aspect of it, and none of them were talking about the political component, the justice component. And so I really saw kind of that gap in environmental justice education. And so I wrote up a curriculum. And at that time, one of my friends went back to work at her local high school in the Bronx, and I pitched it to the vice principal. He loved the idea. And so we implemented the curriculum at that school, and then more teachers reached out to us. And so we continued to work with teachers to implement that at several schools in New York City. And then from there, it kind of grew into a nonprofit organization. And I think for me, I always come back to education with the work I do, because these are not things that are taught in schools. And for youth, most of their time is spent in school, right? K through 12, that's a long time to not be learning about the climate crisis, about environmental justice, about organizing, about politics. And a lot of people don't necessarily know about all of this, which is, a huge barrier to even taking action. And even just, being in Texas and talking to people from different communities that have different opinions, you see how perspectives are just fully shaped by education. And so before we can do any action, there has to be that mass education. And I also see education as not necessarily something that has to be, in formal spaces. It can be in informal spaces like this, and it can also, it's not just necessarily me giving knowledge to other people, we're building knowledge together. And so we really wanted to create a curriculum that kind of embodied that and really centered student voices. And it was really cool to kind of see students connect their lived experience with some of the terms that we were introducing to them, and have them share what their perspective is from growing up in their neighborhoods and kind of how they saw environmental justice and injustices play out. And so that's kind of how Start Empowerment got created. And then last year, we started brainstorming about ways to do more community-based education, which is how our Climate Justice Community School came to be, and our Vanguard program. And so we drew a lot of inspiration from kind of past movements here in the United States, thinking about like Earth Schools, the Black Panthers, et cetera. All of them kind of had a very well built out education program and really youth at the forefront leading some of the movements. And we were thinking about, what is it that we need to be able to successfully build out a movement? And part of that was the education aspect. It was learning new skills. It was financial funding for youth to, be able to lead those projects and have the time to do so. And so that's how we created our Vanguard program. So we currently have 10 incredible Vanguard. And they're all leading a wide range of projects, from fighting the North Brooklyn pipeline to building community gardens. So they're doing some really cool work, and we basically are helping with like mentorship, providing funding, and kind of guiding them through, the process of like how do they get involved in politics, how do they get involved with community, and like also connecting them to all the existing networks that are already present, right? There's no need to reinvent the wheel. So really, we make sure that our work, even though it is youth-led, that it's always intergenerational and that we learn from the wisdom of our elders. And so that's our program, and it's been going on for 6 months now, the Vanguard program. So it's been an honor to work with those folks, and hopefully we'll continue building it out.
Now, I understand you've got a few busy weeks and months ahead of you. You're in grad school now at Harvard, but you're soon going to head down to D.C. for some lobbying, and then to Sharm el-Sheikh for COP27. Could you tell us what you're going to be up to? And how the kind of grassroots climate people are going to be handling being at one of the climate summits in a kind of a weird place like Sharm el-Sheikh, where it there may not be as much freedom to do what you would do, say, in Glasgow or Copenhagen.
Yeah, so I think as part of my kind of organizing work, I both do work, outside of the system, kind of thinking about building community and resilience and mutual aid, and then I also do work more inside the system, so engaging with political systems, both at the local and federal level. So I don't know, as many of y'all probably have heard, there's kind of Manchin's side deal he is currently trying to pass in September, because that's when they have to pass the budget reconciliatory bill, and he's trying to attach it to that. And this side deal basically was made to get Manchin's vote on the IRA. And the bill that is proposed was actually written with the American Petroleum Institute. So that gives you a little insight as to what is in the bill. But it essentially allows the fast tracking of fossil fuel projects without any community input, and it was also gut out a lot of the protections that we have with NEPA. So it is an extremely harmful bill, and a lot of grassroots communities have really, mobilized around it in the past month. There's been, letters signed out. We got 77 Congress members to sign on to it. There were 7 senators that publicly also signed on to our letter. We have over 600 grassroots groups across the U.S. that have also signed on, and we've been doing a lot of lobbying, a lot of phone calls, a lot of press around it. So next week I'm going to D.C. We're going to be doing another huge push around it as kind of the final days. So that's kind of what I'm up to. And then COP27 is also coming up. I think COP is always really interesting because it is not made for any grassroots voices to be included. It is not made from anyone from the global south to be included. It really was made for the head of states and for corporations to be at the table. But I think a lot of grassroots groups from across the world and indigenous groups have noticed that if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. And so despite, not being a pleasant experience showing up, groups have consistently shown up. and kind of had both an internal and external strategy. So thinking about what can we do when in negotiations, how can we push forward, even small pieces of language that would protect, indigenous rights, et cetera, that we can later use. And then kind of the external strategy, which includes, protest, press, et cetera, to put the pressure on these governments to make actual commitments towards shifting away from a fossil fuel economy. And I think this year is definitely going to be interesting, given the lack of opportunity with some of the external kind of opportunities to do strikes and protests, et cetera. But I think it's important to keep in mind that, especially coming from the United States, that a lot of the grassroots groups, our goals is really to pressure the U.S. government and to really look at what we're doing before kind of like pushing other governments, especially given, right, how much of historical CO2 emissions come from Europe and the United States. We really have a huge responsibility to the world to really make those commitments and to really be at the forefront of tackling the climate crisis. And so I think that's kind of the message that the broad general message that we're going into COP27 with. And then we're still in the process of doing kind of some strategizing of like what our demands are going to be, especially in negotiations. But yeah, I think it'll be an interesting experience, definitely an exhausting one. But there's been a lot of really cool solidarity that has come out of that conference and previous ones. And to be able to make those global connections, I think, is really important. There's a lot for us to learn from what different local communities have done. And so that exchange of ideas is something that's really beautiful. So yeah.
Were you in Glasgow last year?
I was actually not, but some of my team members were.
Yeah. It was frustrating there that at the very end, the U.S. and India, a couple of other countries, they had, right toward the end, still had in the statement that comes out of the conference something about phasing out fossil fuels, and our country and others got it switched to phasing down fossil fuels. And it would have been a historic thing to have in there, but it was undercut.
Yeah, I think one thing to point out is even in this past week, the director of, I think it was the World Economic Forum or something, was saying that he did not answer the question as to whether he believed in global warming or not. And I think the president of Chase as well, it was found out that he has no plans in divesting from fossil fuels. And so it's really important to keep in mind that, even till today, the heads of the oil industry and of these, international coalitions and organizations are still very much against phasing out of fossil fuel because they're making so much profit off of it that it doesn't make sense for their personal interest to do that, even though the majority of the world supports a transition.
Would you like to see if anyone has questions for you from out here? Are we equipped with the mic?
I'll grab it from you. Okay. So questions we're going to take. I'm going to ask you to do something that will help everyone, and that is to essentialize your question. So really, really think about it. Distill what you want to say so we can get a few in. And also, if you've already asked a question, I invite you to let someone else ask this one.
Thank you. This is a question I have been asking a number of people. I'm really interested in your response. When I talk to someone and try to explain what is happening, what is coming right now, frequently it's like a traffic engineer or a politician, and their eyes get big like that, and they don't say anything. They don't say anything. And I'm sure that's happened to you. What do you do when that happens?
I mean, I don't think you can kind of control the reactions of other people, but what I like to do is, I offer my piece of knowledge, and sometimes I ask them, what they think about it, or I'll give them time to process, and I'll follow up with them, find them in a couple days, ask them if they have any thoughts about what I just shared, or send them an email, but sometimes people just, take time to process or don't want to respond, quite frankly. And I think that also says something. Sometimes a non-answer is an answer.
I'd like to add a little more in context, or ask you to add a little more context to COP27, because Sharm el-Sheikh is in Egypt. And so as we watch the news of COP27 coming up, I've spent a lot of time in Egypt and have taken students to Egypt multiple times. And so would you expand a little bit on why that matters? San, you referred to that, but can you add a little more information so we have a better sense of why it's interesting and important that Egypt is the governing body for what's going to be happening at COP27?
So I mean, I'm not an expert on the geopolitics of the Egyptian government, but they are known to be, to abuse human rights, especially for LGBTQ members and women, and there's, different protests throughout the years, and I think that was a concern that was raised by a lot of queer activists, was like, is it safe for us to go? And the answer is not necessarily. And I know multiple people that are, queer and that are more kind of like femme presenting or like outwardly visibly queer that are not going because of these human rights abuses. But I think on the other hand, it's important that we don't just avoid COP27 because of the abuse that the Egyptian government has committed, because a lot of these Western countries that are perhaps more safe for protests also commit huge human rights abuse, just in different forms. So thinking about the U.S. government and us bombing other countries, et cetera, and about Black Lives Matter and all of that. So I think it's important that we don't just avoid it, but it is something that needs to be talked about. And I think a lot of us in the grassroots groups are looking for ways to stand in solidarity with the movements in Egypt that are fighting for LGBTQ rights, women's rights, and environmental justice on the ground.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Stan just mentioned is it's kind of being called the African COP, which actually I was talking to an activist a couple days ago who is leading kind of a Pan-African delegation to COP27, and she really felt like this was setting the entire continent up for failure and up for kind of bad marketing, being named the African COP and kind of setting it up for criticism. And then also being Egypt, which is not necessarily representative of the entire continent and most of the countries and the circumstances in these different countries.
Okay, wait, hang on one second. We have a question down here, and then we have one right here. We'll just zigzag back and forth. Okay, go ahead.
Hi. Oh, yep. I have a lot of things in my lap, so... Essentially, my question is, do you have any suggestion on how to build intergenerational camaraderie and unlearning a lot of the biases and traumas that have kept the generations from being able to help each other in advocacy spaces?
That is a big question. I'm still learning how to do that. I mean, I think part of it is one thing that I've been kind of implementing in my work is transformative justice models. So thinking about, how we can all come together and talk about different harms, because even within, communities of color, within marginalized communities, within a coalition or an organization, there's a lot of drama, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of, different interpersonal relationships and things. I know people who are like, I refuse to work this person because of something they said 30 years ago. And that is common in grassroots spaces. And so I think coming together, right, and taking accountability and addressing harm in a safe space and facilitating that. And I've worked with some people who do specialized work in kind of community healing and different therapists that focus on that have kind of come and help build our communities, because, at the center of community organizing is building community, and that's what leads us to power. And so we really do have to address kind of those issues. And yeah, like talking about it, right? Talking about all the issues that came up, and the things we can learn from the elders and the things we can learn from the youth, and why it is important that we are together. And I think a lot of people do want to work together intergenerationally. There's just often, some barriers to that, and we're often not in the same spaces. So I think making that conscious effort to be in those spaces, to invite elders and youths to different events and gatherings and make those connections and see how we can collaborate will always make us stronger.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. Really curious to learn a little bit more about Tesla. So much of Tesla's aura is caught up with Elon Musk and his antics and crazy aspirations for colonizing Mars and his wealth. And there's been, difficult stories about, I've seen stories about how the spaceport developments have really disregarded local communities. I'm curious if you could give us any insight into your experience with the culture of the organization, not necessarily Elon Musk, but what it's like to engage with Tesla, and what kind of an organization is it to engage with from a local community basis?
I think in Austin it's been really frustrating because Tesla came in, they had a deal with the county, right? And they really had zero plans for community engagement. And we really forced that upon them. We built out a coalition and started talking to the press to the point where they had to answer our emails and actually come talk to us. And so I think, you could really tell from their company culture that that wasn't something that's in their DNA, not something that they necessarily cared about. And they were very much just coming in here and, they saw community members as either, workforce or like land to be exploited and to be used. And it's, a very profit-driven environment. And I think also given the loose regulation that Texas has is one of the main reasons they're there. They're being sued currently in California because of racism. And they've, also had a history of like having to pay fines to the EPA for environmental damage. And so being in Texas is very beneficial because of all the loose regulations. And so, yeah, it's been really interesting. We're still at the table with them. There's upcoming meetings. There's definitely some folks that, work for Tesla that are trying to do some community engagement. I'm not sure how much power those folks actually have within the company at large. But we are trying to push for them to make commitments such as, ecological restoration, community education programs. One of the main things we're pushing for is for them to hire Spanish speakers and to actually, have programs where Spanish speakers can learn some English, to be hired because they are in a predominantly Spanish-speaking community, and things like that. But, I think as with any major corporations, it's always kind of like a back and forth dance of, how much do you actually want to collaborate with them, how much external pressure you put, and it's kind of a very fine thing, but we are a little bit hopeful that something good will come out of these negotiations and talking with them and kind of pushing them to understand that they need to go above and beyond and can't just, come here, build a factory, keep profiting and not care about the community they're in.
So I wanted to shout out to you, or reach across to you from the state of Kansas, the state of Texas. We share some common political grounds there. And I wanted to also kind of connect with Toya's question about intergenerational connection. I really appreciate the fact that you're working with schools, directly with high schools. So my question is, in the face of people who are coming to school boards, in the face of state legislatures like ours that are gradually eviscerating public schools for shuffling off tax dollars to private schools, do you have any suggestion or have you had any experience in how to counteract that kind of freedom movement in both states and essentially in much of the United States?
Yeah, so that's not the focus of my work, but I do really support the activists that are doing that are countering kind of the privatization of the entire school system, which is extremely harmful. And also all the bans on like books and like teaching certain histories, et cetera, in school. I think it's really important for us to all get involved in kind of like civic engagement, and a lot of things can actually happen even at the local school board level, even just showing up and testifying at the school boards and kind of demanding what you want. And I think there's a lot of power in organizing and with like parents and students coming in together and to, try to pass local legislation or state legislation or counteract national legislation. So I think, while it's not directly environmental justice, it is so closely related. And at the end of the day, the campaigns are still the same. The way you structure out a campaign, you pick your cause, you kind of map out who has the power to give you what you want, and you strategize as to what are the things that you're going to do, whether that's press, protests, policies, et cetera, to counter that. And I think that's, a very, very important movement that impacts every single movement here in the U.S.
Thank you for being here. I have a question about the Paris process itself and your perspective on it. Last year was COP26. The Paris Agreement went into full effect. We don't have the first global stock take until next year, COP28. And now we begin this kind of 5-year cycle of global stock takes and then increased ambitions, and that 5-year cycle out for the next 6 terms or whatever. It's designed now to be as boring as it possibly can be. So how do we put pressure on these COPs within that framework? And at what point might there be a disruption? And where would we pull the trigger to burn down the entire Paris process?
I'm totally down with that. Yeah, I think it's hard because, again, like you said, it's designed to be slow moving. It's not designed to create change. And policy as a whole, even on the national level in the U.S., is not really designed for fast change, which is what we need. I think a lot of us kind of know that the real change is not going to come from COP, and that we're really there just to prevent kind of some of the disastrous kind of negotiations or things that could happen if we are not present and our voices are not a part of the discussion. But I think most of us, and I say us as like kind of the grassroots groups, really see local movements as the change that is needed and don't necessarily expect radical change coming out of COP, right? Because of, who's leading it, and also because it's so top down, and also because at the end of the day, they don't have any that. Even the Paris Climate Agreement doesn't actually have any teeth. Countries can just opt out, they can just not do it. There's not many ways to hold them accountable. And so I think right now we're kind of just attending it to make sure that our voices are part of it and we're not, being completely screwed over, while building those movements at home that we think are going to be creating the change that needs to happen. And I think trying to build that movement, I think for me it goes back to education, right? When we think about burn the whole system down, or how can we create alternative systems that are not colonial, that are not capitalist, it goes back to we need mass education. We need people on board. We can't have a top-down revolution. It has to be bottom-up, and it has to come from the people.
Hi. So in this work, I've gotten to meet a lot of really passionate young people who are working in agriculture and organizing environmental work, and that's been amazing. And I've also seen the ways in which some of these structures meant to fight capitalism and fight climate change reenact those things, where I've seen a lot of overexploitation of the energy and the passion and the labor of young people as they get involved in this work, which can sometimes lead to burnout and disconnecting altogether. I'm wondering about, in your work as you're educating and bringing more young people into this work, how are you teaching about self-advocacy and how to work on self-empowerment and growth to avoid burnout as we're doing this really urgent work?
I'm so glad you asked this question because I was just talking to a friend the other day and I was like, I think every youth activist I know is burnt out, which is a problem. I think in organizing space, there's very much this culture of like, we have to do more and more and more at the expense of ourselves, which we need to shift away from. And one thing I've been really reading a lot about and preaching is, both self-care and collective care. Thinking about how we center that and how we center healing in our work, because we are looking to build a sustainable movement, and it doesn't serve anyone to burn out and then leave the movement because of the conditions. And so I think we need to make sure that, when we're talking about these systems like capitalism, that we're not perpetuating that in our interpersonal spaces. And so I think, for work, that looks like, making sure we have time off, making sure we're respecting boundaries, making sure that we are distributing work, and like if we have a need for increased capacity, to look for that need, to look for someone to fill that need, and not just like putting it on someone, and to know when to say no to to opportunities, to campaigns, etc. Because it's more important to carry one out well than to take on many. And so I think that's something that I'm starting to see more conversations around, thankfully, but something that the movement as a whole needs to work on. And then I think the other thing is that while the media likes to kind of glamorize the youth movement, to know that it's not necessarily something to be glamorized. I'm really honored to be doing the work that I do, and so are all the other incredible youth that I've met. But in an ideal world, I don't think that, kids, especially young kids, should be having that responsibility of doing such hard work on top of. And so I think it's really important for us to not glamorize that, and to really encourage intergenerational organizing and making sure that everyone of all ages kind of gets involved and puts in their part to create a more sustainable movement.
Is this on? Oh, there we go. But I want to turn it back to both of you just for 1 minute, and to name again that this effort of Stan's and the community he's creating is written in a blog post on City Lights Books website once a month. It's called In Real Time, and to get a beautiful visual. It's Time by Preeti Gulati Cox is the way to do that. And that's up for you to visit right on the other side of the Red Barn Gallery. So I want to just say that in 10 years from now, after this spark of a conversation on this stage at Prairie Festival, what do you imagine might have come to bear from our connection here today and you two connecting with one another? Just imagine it in 10 years, given that we are creating this movement from the ground down, and that's what we're talking about. Can you see how we might have planted seeds together and had them grow? And you might not answer that. You might just take that as a vision for what's possible. But I'm going to hand this back to you, and then you'll have about a minute to wrap up, and then we'll go off.
I firmly believe that it will lead to great things. Yeah. But there's no way of knowing what we have lying ahead of us in those next 10 years, or what the former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld called unknown unknowns. There are a lot of things that we know that we don't know, but there's going to be a lot more that we don't even that we don't expect, and we're seeing that already with climate change. But I think the more that we do the kind of discussion that we're doing here today, the better prepared we're going to be for it. So now, I think Alexia should save me here and say something coherent.
I was trying to buy some time by having you go first. I mean, I don't have the answers, and also if someone says they do, I would probably run the other direction if someone claimed they had all the answers. But what I think is beautiful is that, we have a community of people that care so deeply about each other and about Mother Earth. And we know that we are dedicated to that, in whatever work we do, whatever that can come up, and you can integrate that in your life. And that gives me so much hope for all the new possibilities. And I think, as we move forward, there's so much room for imagination of new creative solutions that are grounded in old wisdom, but also new creative ideas. And so I am hopeful. I try to practice hope as a discipline. And I am hopeful for what is to come and what all of us can imagine together. And I think it's important to keep walking and imagining and moving forward, even if we don't have the solutions yet.
And finally, following up what Emily said, there are several parts to the In Real Time project, including Preeti's visual work down here, and also Sarah Cruz does an audio version of these written essays that are at City Lights Books. I know Alexia prefers listening to Sarah, and I know a lot of other people say, yeah, I'd rather hear Sarah tell me than to read you. And then we have, so for all three of these things, there are QR codes down at Preeti's tent and in the bookstore, rather than me reading out URLs to you. But look for those. URLs are on there too, though.
Thank you.
Okay. We did hear some of Bill's music. Thank you. Yeah, you can keep it playing. I can talk around it. Thank you, whomever asked the question about the intergenerational challenge. And I am proud to say that at the Land Institute, we are a group of 4 generations. And it is. Thank you also for providing me a great segue into our next conversation, which is between Wes Jackson and Eric Schlosser. And so we're getting both ends of the spectrum generationally here back to back, which is fabulous. So they're going to talk about how the new future is gone. I don't see Wes. Oh, there he is. Okay. He's never late. They're going to talk about how the new future is gone, which is a bit that you will read in The Inconvenient Apocalypse, the new book that's out. I also want to just acknowledge that Wes is, and you all know this, but I can't help but repeating it, the person who said that if our life's work can be completed in our lifetime, then we're not thinking big enough. I saw a quote, a wonderfully interesting thing written in the trailer that said that there are only a few species that have grandparents, and humans are one of them. And so I offer that as a through line about this generational thing that we're both grappling with and can be inspired by. Eric and Wes, come on up.
Well, I'd love for you to show the audience the title and the cover of your new book. It's called An Inconvenient Apocalypse. And Wes,
I assume they're going fast.
I'm really honored to share the stage with you. And before we get to the apocalypse, I'm really, really curious about the beginnings of your thought on a lot of these subjects. And, you know, yesterday I was talking about the Back to the Land movement, and I'm curious how much of those early thinkers were an influence on you. You know, the British leaders of the Soil Association who were really rethinking agriculture. You know, in getting to where you are now, I'm sort of interested in the intellectual journey and where it started.
So you don't want to know about this book?
No, I do. I really do, but I want the context.
Yeah. Well, the context is that, you know, I was born on a farm in the Kansas River Valley near Topeka. And I think the first offense I experienced as an environmental reality, I didn't know the word environment, and I didn't know why I was offended, but Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company built, this is during the war, WW2, the big one, they built a factory on one side of Highway 24 and 40. Then they built a factory on the other side of Highway 24 and 40. Then they just built right across the road. Now, all around there were people at work in fields with draft horses, with tractors, with hoes. That was the valley of diversity that fed, and it was the same all the way from Manhattan to Kansas City. But then here comes, and two highways, they get blocked by a factory on both sides. And how old was I? 8 or 9. Now, I didn't know that this was a problem. I only knew that they were blocking traffic and they were disrupting my vision. I went to a 2-room country school. I had uncles and aunts on farms all around me, and my brothers were in the war in the Pacific. But what's going on here? So that's the first. Well, then you move through time, and 1950 comes up, and by golly, we're kind of glad this war is over. And there's even talk about, in fact, I got a book on this published in 46, it was my geography book, and they're bragging on the Soviet Union and the collectivization, and 3 years later, we get a Cold War started. All right, well, so what's going on here? You know, these are the people that helped us defeat Hitler. And then we move on. You see why you shouldn't have asked me.
I'm really curious because.
But the thing is, the people that were in my world, I began to hear people that were talking about all this. And so when I went away to graduate school, came back, I was beginning to get too connected to convention. But my students told me they wanted something relative the next time around. And I was teaching them biology. So I clipped and tore and I Xeroxed and I filed and I came out with Man in the Environment. Only 2 things wrong with the title. But the people that were, it was an anthology, the people that I represented in there, they were my teachers, and that was a consequence of clipping and tearing and Xeroxing and filing in order to meet the needs of the moment in 1960. Well, it was 60. What year were you born, Sarah? Yeah. Yeah, 48. That's 68. So that then we were launched. And so, yeah, it was then David Brower, and it was all of the folk of that time, the Whole Earth Catalog. I went on the board of, what was the name of that board? What? Friends of the Earth. And what was the publication? Not Man Apart. And there we were. This wasn't publication in refereed journals, but it made a movement. And then it kind of drifted around and went away, and people with mature judgment saying you're alarmist. And so once you get on the road, there's somebody that will stand up. You're a fool. You don't know what you're talking about. Well, here is just one little thing. My next oldest sibling was born in 28. There were 2 billion people in the world.
Yeah.
My next oldest sibling died a year ago. We're approaching 8. Now, how hard is that? There's never been any time in the history. So there began to be validation of all of this. And so maybe it started with Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company.
Yeah. But you know, when you look back at the Back to the Land movement and the beginnings of the environmental movement, there was a really savage critique of industrial society, and yet there was also an optimism. You know, there was a Crosby, Stills, Nash Young song that was, you know, we can save the world, it's dying. And there were some very dark visions, like Paul Ehrlich's population bomb, that really suggested things couldn't be reversed. But a lot of the spirit was about possibility. And I'm wondering, you know, in terms of the book, when your vision began to change on that.
Yeah, Paul Ehrlich wrote the foreword to Man and the Environment. I'd known him as a graduate student at KU. But when did it change? I don't think it's changed yet. That we still have this optimism that is derived from the worst kind of religious fundamentalism. It's called technological fundamentalism.
Yeah.
To believe that we're going to solve these problems through technology rather than start acting in a decent sort of way.
Yeah.
So I think that we're still not there to what our book is about.
Yeah.
And by the way, Bob Jensen, the only reason it says Jackson and Jensen is that A comes before E. You want to work that out. And we helped one another. He helped me a lot. And where did he get his radical nature? Well, it was out of leftist politics and other things. And he's a clear thinker. And so he helped me get the courage to say what we finally need to say.
Yeah.
And what a lot of my fellow environmentalists, I love them all, do not want to say yet. But we're saying, okay, folks, we got to figure out how to live within the deeper and deepening apocalypse. I think in a certain sense we've been into apocalypse for 10,000 years since the beginning of agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
and that the apocalypse accelerated 5,000 years ago with the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and that the apocalypse really took off in the coal, the oil, the natural gas. And all of those had something to do with carbon as the primary thing. So you look around, why aren't we gaining on this? I mean, we know what the story is. Why can we not do it? And so that's the reason that, the title we wanted was The Old Future is Gone.
Yeah.
But that doesn't sell like the title that was decided for us.
Yeah.
So, did I answer your question?
I'm gonna push a little more to get that answer. When did you really start thinking about these problems in terms of the apocalypse? When did your own sense of where this movement was going and failing take you in a direction that saw all of this human technology and agriculture as leading towards an apocalypse? I mean, is it in the last few years? Was there a precipitating event? Was it the failure to deal with climate change, or was it a confluence of things that brought you to this?
Well, this is an answer to your question. This is. But you got to be patient with it. When I was teaching at Cal State, Sacramento, and we came back to this property right here, this 30 acres. And we made a decision, and I had tenure, I was full professor and so on, and we wrote up what it was that this was going to be about. And we said, devoted to a search for sustainable alternatives in agriculture, energy, shelter, waste management, and that we would spend half time in reading and thinking and discussing, and the other half time hands-on. It was wanting to get the hands-on to stop. Well, then it was after that the idea of perennial grain polyculture came up. Now, we didn't have the language of a lot of the present, but I think we felt something was wrong, and enough that we quit. Yeah. And I mean, this barn is not what you would call something designed by an architect somewhere. But this barn is made out of railroad ties. We were able to put together something that would keep alive these growing ideas. Well then, and I'd be on the road giving a talk somewhere, and there would be the people devoted to local, organic, community supported. They had all that language, and they're our colleagues. And then somebody would raise their hand and say, are you optimistic? And because I saw the movement there, I'd say, I'd think, yeah, I'm optimistic. Maybe we can get this headed off. Well, nothing changed other than an increase in the language. And so finally, I guess I'd have to say I'm into my 80s before I realized we're not going to do it. And that we better acknowledge, and that's when we got biblical. And you see in the book that how much we pull out of the Bible, but in a secular way. I happen to think that religion is the encoded language of behavior that serves to facilitate the transfer of energy through systems. And so there's a certain usefulness in all of that. And so that's where we have language of the apocalypse, and we have language of saving a remnant. Those are real. Yeah. And so we realize we ain't the first to have to deal with this problem. I mean, that idea of a saving remnant is old, and many times it pops up like toast throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah. And
Now, did that help you?
No. That did. I mean, I feel like it's in the last decade or so that you've stopped wanting to tell people a false optimism, and that this book is really the distillation of what you think is a hard reality that people need to confront. And there's no point in, especially people who care about these issues, to be in denial anymore.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at other societies throughout history, there are great empires and great societies that, the remnants of them are ruins that we can go and visit. And in terms of, the apocalypse as you see it coming, is it specific to one nation-state society? Is it a more general one? I mean, the book of Revelations has a very, detailed description of a certain kind of apocalypse, but what is it specifically that you think is going to happen, and how much time do we have to get ourselves ready for it?
Next question. Well, Bob and I have talked about this a lot, of course, and in the writing. And something about Bob that'll stiffen your back if you begin to get a little flaky. And I would say that all we had to do was look around at not just the denial that was showing up, but the people that deeply believed we had a problem but could not take themselves away from the possibility of a more proper kind of politics, or couldn't take themselves away from the technology. My good friend who is good at technology, Amory Lovins, and we've had him here many times. It's hard to get him to talk about the social, political, economic, and even religious implications that come from our collective consciousness. And so we decided to burrow in all the way and treat it in a certain, maybe treat it like a person that's just been diagnosed as with cancer. Okay, what do we do? And what can we do? What do we do? And so that's why we tried to drive the conversation to a different level. And I think it is coming a bit. But we also, and if you're careful to read the very end of the book, which most of you will, first, just in case, what we say is that and this is the last sentence, we end on what we believe is the most upbeat note possible, offering strong endorsement of love and action, recognizing that at our moment in history that love is bound to be harsh and dreadful, but it's still love. So it doesn't mean there's nothing left. There's nothing left. But it's going to be tough. And it's going to require, I think this becomes the great moment for Homo sapien. Because we didn't know where we came from. We kept making up mythologies about where we came from. Most of those during or many of those at least that got published, during the agricultural period of 10,000 years. And we kept thinking we're engaging in some kind of improvement. And look what happened in the last, say, 150 to 200 years. We now, because of the astrophysicists, know, based on verifiable data, about the journey from the Big Bang to the present. We now know of our origins in a way we never knew before. And we also have the Darwinian explanation on how life forms come into existence. We've got an understanding of where we come from and what kind of a thing we are, and we also are able to say, with it not being metaphorical, that the earth is our creator. You know, I mean, the journey from minerals to cells to we know that now, and we would not have known that without that highly dense carbon. So now, let's use what we have learned, and now all we got to do is figure out a way to stay amused while we live till we die cheap.
Well, you know,
independent, you know, of some kind of funny economy way of doing the business.
Yeah.
So if we can get that done, then we will make it without. We'll make it for a longer period of time.
You know, in the book, there are sections on determinism and geographic determinism about, you know, where industrialism and the scientific method began. And I'm wondering, in the sense of determinism, you know, if the apocalypse begins with agriculture 10,000 years ago and our dependence on carbon, was there ever any way that we could have averted the place that we're in? Or once we went down this path, as you look back at the movements that you were involved in, do you just think they were all doomed to fail? Or was there a moment when we could have changed course and we didn't?
I think that there are probably planets in which there are other intelligences like ours, because they're, you know, billions of Earth-type things, and they will have enough of the proper combination to give us intelligent life form. And my bet is they will, and this is from talking to people that are physicists, that they'll all be carbon-based. But I mean, and some will be smart enough to figure out ways to head this off, and the rest of us will just not. But I mean, I'm hoping we can be one of those some.
Were we doomed the moment that we stopped being hunter-gatherers, and the moment that we invented agriculture? Was the ending that you see coming present from the decision to change that lifestyle?
Yeah, that's my view. Because look, we were at least 200,000 years with the big brain, and it wasn't until 10,000 years ago that we started agriculture. It may be as many as 300,000, but this, I mean, where did it happen? I mean, why did it happen? It happened because of some consequences, probably. At the eastern end of the Mediterranean, we don't pay enough attention to the ice sheet. At the eastern end of the Mediterranean, it was drying out at the end of the Pleistocene, and that's where right there at the end of the Mediterranean, it became possible to get that highly dense carbon out of certain grasses that happened to have grown there, and get the grain, the carbon that was in that soil, what we call the young pulverized coal of the soil. I got that from Amory, by the way. Got allocated up into seeds, and the next thing you know, we now have little grains that can become actually what is the first money. It can be weighed, it had direct value, It came from the direct value of people growing it and harvesting it, and the next thing you know, we got an economic system. We're no longer merely gatherers and hunters. And so we were off and running. And we happen to have those rivers, and then we get religion. Most of the religion is a consequence of agriculture. And then when that Bronze Age and Iron Age was bigger than I think most of us appreciate, because we now had something to smelt the ore. We had the forests available to smelt the ore for the Bronze and the Iron Age, and that gave us a period in which we could then get ships that could go all the way to Spain, get more iron, and by golly, we do it. What do? We get swords and we get plowshares. Now, I've written that they used to beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. That's biblical. I say that the plowshares destroyed more options for future generations than the sword. Now, that clap.
In the book, you talk about the value of dithering as a sort of a solution or a way to sort of rethink life in the face of what's coming. And what does that mean more specifically? I mean, as a way of being and living.
Say again, the value of
dithering and a kind of what's the best response in a day-to-day way to the impossibility of averting the apocalypse?
You're asking what's the response?
Yeah. What would be the way to live? I mean,
what would it be like to stay amused while we live till we die cheap?
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, and you'll note in here, we put quite an emphasis on scale. And we have a chapter in there about the 4 hard problems. It comes down to really, if you're looking for 2 things, fewer and less. Fewer people, less stuff. And the question is, can we make that transition downward in population and do it fast enough? This is what I think is on the line, is now speed. How much, well, we say that too. To downpower fast and get used to less stuff. And that's one reason I got this little art project of mine about looking to nature for the beauty. And that's the Art Without Ego project. Any number of us can go out and find beauty and start staying amused while we live till we die, enjoying the beauty of the earth. Enjoying this wonderful place yet. And then trying to, if we get communities that are small enough, and Dunbar's number, it's like 150 or so is the number of people that can operate together in something or other. And I really think that scale is got to be paid attention to. Scale in size of communities and in organizations. More is different. And in fact, just to prove that, I'm going to tear out a sheet of here. I'll just tear out this sheet, man. Convenient apocalypse. One fold. You know where I'm headed, don't you? Two fold. Three fold. Four fold. Five fold. I can't go anymore. I can't go anymore. And if I were to have a piece of paper or cloth the size of that wall, I cannot get any more folds than I got here. More is different. We got to get a grip on that. We are not the same with too many people. We're not the same with what some would consider not too many, but are ending up doing stupid things, and they don't know why. I think that's part of the work that you're dealing with about prisons and incarceration and so on. Why is that? I think that we're not paying enough attention to the folding of paper. And this isn't just, it could be anything. You just try to get the number of folds in there and you're not going to get it. All right, so that's for no extra charge.
So, I mean, in the face of this, you know, after the Second World War and after the revelation of the death camps and everything, you know, Camus wrote about the myth of Sisyphus, and his response to kind of the overwhelming darkness and evil was struggle and the continual fight against it. And in the myth of Sisyphus, the moment that Sisyphus is most happy is he's rolled this huge boulder up to the top of the hill, he gets it there, and then he starts seeing it rolling down. And that's the moment of happiness because he realizes that life is struggle and he has to continue the fight, even if there's no hope of victory, that what you do is you fight. Yeah. And where would you be on that?
Well, I mean, I'm right with Sisyphus on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is, look, where do we find meaning? We find meaning when there is engagement in something that is perceived as necessary. And I find meaning out of dirt in the bathtub, where I've just taken a bath. I've done something.
Yeah.
And I've had some joy in the use of the body. That's meaning.
Yeah.
You know, so you slush it around when you pull the plug to get it out of there so the next person doesn't have a bunch of dirt around the edge. But the larger point being is feeling about having done something that is at once necessary and useful. Necessary and useful. Yeah. And that means and that's where community comes in. That's where we've got to learn how to, if we do that, it'll be easier to love one another. Now, it doesn't mean that you're kissing and hugging and making everything come out even all the time. But it means you're dealing with the connection. And we're more like the Upper Paleolithic, the gatherer and the hunter. I just discovered, or was finally able to admit, that I got attention deficit disorder. And I didn't realize that until I realized how much I'm unable to pay attention into a lot of things that are going on. I've tried to attribute it to, well, I already know enough of that and I don't need to know any more and so on. But I also think that there's still people that are bearing down. Well, I think in the Upper Paleolithic, my genotype was waiting. Everybody is focused around the campfire deliberating about some important thing, but I'm looking to see if something's going to come in and eat us, you know. and so that's the value of attention deficit disorder. We need to start promoting attention deficit disorder in our schools.
Okay. Why do you think there is so much denial of the facts that you put forward in the book?
Well, nothing fails like success. And if you have those telling you we've got to keep the economy going, it's got to be more next year, we've got to be, I mean, that's just natural for people to want to have things better. And so I think it's probably built into the meat. It's built into the meat. That's where then we got to figure out what to do, that which is built in with the meat. That's the thing about, here's the big thing I think is facing us. We all know that you can be in an argument at the Thanksgiving table with the uncle that keeps being mentioned that's obnoxious and tries to spoil the dinner. We keep hearing about that uncle. And what was I going to say? Yeah. I don't know what I was going to say. I'll get it later. But I was going to say something about, it was profound too. What did you ask?
I was asking about denial, about why is there the denial towards this hard reality that you wrote about?
Well, if things are going along well, then that's the way it was in the Upper Paleolithic.
Yeah.
And so then maybe there gets to be a change. Some other group maybe come over and start challenging because there's been a drought or something. But, you know, you're living kind of day to day. And so when things are going well, let's just keep on doing it. And rather than acknowledge that in industrial world that we are just a bunch of miners. We're mining the ecological capital through the destruction of our ecosystems. And this then brings up, I think, the most important point for all of us. This big transition is going to require humanity to do something it's never done, which is to regard the ecosystem as the conceptual tool for the management of resources. Now, the ecosystems are what sustain us. We keep talking about species extinction. Well, we better be thinking about the systems that are integrated and don't think, well, I can harvest this because it's useless, or I can harvest that because it's useless. Look, there's those of you that know me, I'll probably say, oh, there he goes again. There are atoms, then the next level up are molecules, and the next level up tissues, and the next level up organs, and then organ systems, and then what comes next? Organisms. What comes next is organisms. Now, the next question was, what comes next? And a guy named Feibelman is the one that raised that law of integrative levels. Well, what comes next? Some were saying species. Some said population. And no, not species or population. Jay Stanrow, who's spoken in this barn, said, what do the other categories have in common? Atoms, molecules, cells, tissues, organs, organisms. They all have contiguous volume. Species don't have contiguous volume. Populations don't have contiguous volume. Ecosystems do. So we're talking about solving problems using slabs of space-time. You got that? The slabs of space-time. Now, here's the problem. The slabs of space-time, what is the size of your slab? And is that slab this community? Now, we all know that the slabs are our calling out what the size is. It's us, because all slabs leak. Don't think you can just take care of your slab and not have something coming through like a storm. You know, but that's where you begin. We can't take on the universe. We can't take on everything, and that's why scale becomes important. We get a slab within a context of support for our food supply and engagement. But if you don't get that number down, then you're stuck with folding paper. You get that paper to the point you can't fold it anymore.
I think are there any questions?
Oh, we do not have time for questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I bet there are approximately 1,000 questions out here that would graciously be asked. So we're gonna wrap up. Wes, you got the last word. That's how it should be.
Oh yeah. Well, this is pretty good. This turned out better than I thought.
Thank you. Yeah, we are, after all, creatures, so please take a creaturely break. And we'll be back in 20 minutes at 11:05. I know you've heard a lot of great folks, but you haven't heard them all. Okay, now run. All right, this is going to be the keynote, the Strachan and Vivian Donnelley family lecture. Hi, Sophia. David Norland, this is the second time I've had to call your name. You can stay there, you're good. Clearly you can hear me out there. All right. This is our Strachan and Vivian Donnelley family lecture. It is named in remembrance of Strachan and Vivian Donnelley and their support for the Land Institute's radical vision over decades. They deeply believe that we make connections when we engage with nature, and they had a special connection to the prairie. Our work at the Land Institute and our collective work together stands on a foundation built by the Donnelley family and thousands of others, individuals who have contributed over the decades. For them and for you, we are perennially thankful. And I am humbled to introduce the presenter for this lecture, Huascar Medina, the poet laureate of this great state. Thank you. He says, quote, "As a second-generation immigrant and a first-generation Kansan, it took me a long time to find a place to call home. And what I love about Huascar is that he challenges and disproves the mythological notion that your home place can only be where you were born. New roots can develop, and home can be anywhere you choose. Home is arguably inside your human body." So, I'm not even going to say the rest of it. It's just, he should just go. So, with that, I'll just introduce and bring you up here my Kansan brother, Huascar Medina.
It took 3 years, but I finally have a podium in front of me. So thank you for that. I had to find one in the Prairie. I would like to start with just an introduction about poetry myself and how I use poetry. I'm just a poet, writing poetry for ordinary people so they may experience an extraordinary moment of truth and empathy. As a second-generation immigrant living in the heartland of the United States, I am actively exploring and challenging the boundaries between location and identity. I want my work to blur the man-made borders that separate us. I want my words to create lines of compassion between diverse members of our society who may never have an opportunity to connect by choice or circumstance. I believe poetry is the path to understanding. It is the path of least resistance. It is the widest path for us to travel down together. Poetry allows us to speak with grace, to simultaneously hold vigil and protest, to share hard truths in soft ways. Poetry can also be prayer, a collection of possibilities, the remnants of a time past or the promise of a future unlived. It is all encompassing because poets concern themselves with all things, viewing the world with a concerned eye at all times. We do not practice vigilance. We are naturally predisposed by it. We see and feel deeply. Thank you to the Land Institute for allowing me to be here today. Emily, thank you for your assistance, and Rachel and Wes Jackson, thank you so much. In the last 3 years, I've attended over 100 readings, workshops, and presentations. I have done over 50 commissioned poems across the state and some outside of the state. I've traveled thousands of miles, and that's with COVID, so I had a lot of making up to do this past year. And I've been on the road for the last month. This is where I picked up this notebook in Liberal, Kansas this week, where I was able to give books away to high school students, because I do believe that the work that I have tried to begin in Kansas for Latinos in the arts, and that others have done before, must continue with the next generation of artists and Latinos. I will begin by letting everyone know that there are poets in the room, because a bunch of you wrote in typewriters in a horse trailer the last couple of days, and I've taken those words and put them together, not edited those words, but just slightly grouped them in ways that I feel were appropriate. With your permission, I would like to share a couple of those poems that were built, and no one's name's attached to them. I've decided to say that these poems are written by the Prairie. So these are the poems written by the Prairie. There are two different types of universes that we are in. One could be that all universes are just floating around in space. Another idea is that the universes could be bulging out from bigger universes. That would mean that we could be a giant universe or just a small one when compared to other ones. When Isaac Newton was 6 or 7, he made a machine to feed his chickens that he was able to operate from his bedroom window. This was before he discovered gravity and how rainbows work. Fannie Lou Hamer, George Washington Carver, these are the seeds of the Black radical tradition in the soil in Salina, cold soil on my feet in Salina, stanzas and secluded verses, still searching for the roots, chase this day of wasp and frisbee, sleepless nap times and perennial grains. It is wonderfully interesting to experience the resonance of souls that take a place at a gathering of people who feel called to the same purpose. Gentleness, kindness, and joy are together the fertilizer for good. A lot of writing was done, but I would like to get to my work shortly, but I want to share one more with you, because these are wonderful pieces of poetry written by the Prairie. My great-grandmother taught me to can pickled peaches, and tomatoes, we ate them with fresh biscuit made with bacon grease from a hog my dad raised last year. The milk and the biscuits came from our neighbor's milking cow, which was stored in a pump house over an old, deep, cold well. The tomatoes grew in my mother's back garden, big, fat, juicy tomatoes we peeled, quartered, and stewed. My great-uncle Bill grew the peaches next to his big old farmhouse. Now I grow tomatoes to eat, apples to dry, cherries to pickle. If only my neighbors had a cow. That there are only a few species with grandparents, human beings being one of them. Why are we so lucky? I never know what I'm going to read, and I've been reading this book for over 2 years across the state. And it's always the moment presents itself and allows me to read what needs to be read. It's the only way I can describe it, what I'm compelled to read in the moment. And the conversation earlier about apocalypse, I thought about, in context to religion, at the Frank Lloyd Wright Church in Kansas City, I was commissioned to do a poem to A Love Supreme by John Coltrane, and I focus on Psalms, the last portion of it, because that is also poetry. And my theory is the reason why the apocalypse hasn't happened is because of a solo that John Coltrane played in The Love Supreme. So, and this is that poem. The last psalm. His psalms, the last song before revelation, freeing and protecting our bodies, saving our souls, and saving our souls, and saving our souls again, if need be. As long as he's playing that psalm, 7 trumpets remain silent, awaiting their solos, unable to bring forth woe, an act worthy of divinity in itself, an act even angels find hard to follow. I will share a found poem before I get into Mango Grows in Kansas specifically. The news has been kind of difficult for me to watch when it comes to the issue of immigration and the way that we're being used as pawns for political motives. I've only removed 2 words from this article that I found in USA Today. Those words were yellow-headed. Today's headlines: birds plunge from the sky. Today, watch, hundreds of birds suddenly drop from the sky in Mexico. Share this via Facebook, Twitter, or email. New graphic video shows a group of blackbirds suddenly plunged to the ground in Mexico. Many died while others flew away. The reason remains unclear, but some say they may have been trying to escape a predatory bird swooping from above. This book begins my journey arriving in Kansas. And the first poem is titled Arriving in Kansas. I rode a Greyhound bus to Kansas in 2001, and it was a very long Greyhound bus ride. You know, I've traveled a lot in my life. I've been a traveling poet for over 10 years. I've seen a lot of this state and other states, and I've seen a lot of floors and couches along the way. So it's glad to have finally found a home in Kansas. It really is. I would like to acknowledge my parents, which I do in the beginning of this book. My father is Puerto Rican. My mother is Panamanian. To my parents, you came a long way to bring me here. We are so far away from your homes. I hope our ancestors remember me. Arriving in Kansas, Part 1. I hear the melodies of meadowlarks in the hinges of a swinging door, doors that lead to tall gray steps climbed in stages towards a window seat, the only chair without a safety belt. Charcoal black turns clockwise, tugging towards anything other than before, a pull of freedom sensed as progress, a fetish for forward motion, romanticized in our devotion to time, submission to time, religion of time, our pocket dictators tapping through glass, fearful of time elapsed, infinite ellipsis. It wasn't dusk or sky emanating through cracked glass of the Greyhound bus that awakened me. Not the hum of rubber to asphalt from soft new wheels in ecstasy with the heat of friction. There is a river god on wheels who presses the gas pedal, taking me to a new type of prison. 2. It was always the little things. Chirping from a single circling Dorman 611-303 lug nut, natural, steel, that whistles when we break because a mechanic was too busy to tighten it up or too distracted by the world to care enough about the safety of those who traveled together. But I have always traveled alone, on buses, in taxis, trains, and planes, my ticket pocket placed in a blazer, the kind we are expected to wear at our wake, a constant reminder that the only destination worth traveling to is in ourself, and no one can come with us in the end. Life's the longest Midwest goodbye. Dying a ceremony we are forced to pay for after the gone are long gone and along their way to the last stop after off-ramps truly become one-ways, no turnarounds, no detours, all stop in black tops, too macabre to acknowledge daily. Our journey is exiting. 3. The sound of breaking. I pull a ticket stub from my pocket, glance at my watch. We were never on time. I read my receipt, itinerary, city, arrival, layover, departure. My favorite poet is Neruda and Jimmy Santiago Baca. They've written some of the most important work that's influenced me over the years. My favorite book by Jimmy Santiago Baca is Immigrants in Our Own Land. I still read it regularly, and it's still very true today. This poem is entitled Spanish Knotted Feather Stitching. Only Neruda can save us. I've written him pleas for guidance, addressed it to the waning crystal moon on that red branch of the now gone autumn in his window. They're cinched with threads to palomas, who refuse to wear the satchels my abuelita knitted through manos anudado before her passing. Las palomas argued for practicality, balance, and against my need for sentimentality. The added weight of things makes flight onerous, they'd say. How I wish these birds were more passenger pigeon, less dove, willing to fight through wind and rain to get there, okay with war and loss. I've even taught them to fly in cursive, in case they didn't make it, so others may see the phrases passing by before they're shot down. But very few people see the need for soft, round words, free and flowing in the air, their grace appearing indecisive, almost lost from below. How they've pitied them, poor palomas. I beg of you, please take these notes to his shores, sing towards the sill in his view. Be candid, have manners, wipe the sand from your feet before entering, bathe in his café, perch yourself upon his fingerpiece. I just have to know. Can a song of despair come before a love poem? I've had difficulty reading this week a lot of these poems because they're very dear to my heart, and this is very well the last time that I will do this Umango and Cass's presentation as the Poet Laureate, so feels like a swan song a little bit today. The next poem is entitled Por Favor, and it's me trying to investigate what the colonizers have done to Puerto Rico not only have I been removed from Spanish, but I've also been removed from Taino, so I feel separated from my mother tongue. And this poem references Atabey, who is the creator in Taino mythology, and it ties to a story about the male children were taken from their parents, and if they cried, they were turned into frogs. I believe this story has continued subconsciously into the myth of the Coqui, which is the frog from the island of Puerto Rico. And it's said that if that frog ever leaves the island of Puerto Rico, that it will perish. And I think about my father and how much his family told him to not go to the mainland, to stay in Puerto Rico. So this poem is Por favor, and it's an ask, a prayer. Toa, toa, mother, madre, Atabey, please come home. Take me to the beach sands infinite, blanketing us with abandoned time. These men are monsters, they are not gods. Why do you hide? Toa, toa, mother, madre, Atabey, please come home. I'll perish if I leave, turned frog for crying, Coqui, Coqui. I will not stay without you. This has not been home. These men are monsters. They are not gods. Please don't leave us all behind. Toa, toa, mother, madre, Atabey, please come home. These men are monsters. They are not gods. Save me, from us. One of the highlights of being published in my life was being published in a literary magazine I wanted to be published in. So it doesn't happen often. We poets spend probably 95+% of our time in a state of rejection. So you have to celebrate when it does go our way. This poem is entitled Mi Isla, and it deals with isolation that I feel when I first came to Kansas and how alone I felt being here. There are some words that I'd like you to know what they mean in Spanish. El yunque is a junco in Puerto Rico. Un brindis por ti, papá, is a toast for you, Father. Coquis de parranda are the frogs, and parranda is Christmas caroling during the holidays. And there's this quiet, unspoken pressure that you should go home for the holidays in Puerto Rico, and if you don't, maybe there's a fight or a rift in the family, so you have to show up. And I haven't in a few years, so I will try to rectify that this next year, hopefully. The other word is very important to me. My father's father is a descendant of slaves. They cut sugarcane on the island of Puerto Rico, and they're referred to as jibaros. And jibaros are peasant farmers. And they're not treated with respect. They're seen as uneducated, not smart, not intellectuals. And I see correlations sometimes when I first moved here and people telling me, why would you move to Kansas? You know, there's nothing but farmers there and whatnot. So it was just really interesting. I stopped explaining why I moved here. I started asking why they haven't left where they're at. So, Mi Isla. I ate a mango today. It was mostly green with reds and yellows. El yunque at dawn is mostly green with reds and yellows. My homeland's enchanted, full of shady jungle mountains, gawking naked beaches, slowly necking ocean. There, sea breezes woo the palm trees, and peeping coconuts faint from holding on too long and sand asleep, daydreaming of me. Tonight, un brindis por ti, papá. Let us pretend the crickets are drunken coquis de parranda, struggling with loss, singing in the wrong key, playing out of tune, unable to find their way home. Let us pretend we are surrounded by vacation, not work, that all this wheat is beach, that the above blue is ocean. Let us pretend you're watching me ripe in a hammock's womb, strung to horizons with no ocean or beach sand near nor fear, that I've become landlocked here, surrounded by jibaros who don't like jibaros, still an island. Thank you. Very welcoming crowd. I really appreciate that. This next poem is entitled "When It's Mango Season in Puerto Rico." My sister's relationship with my father is distant. My parents split when I was young. It's something I'm working on, reconnecting with my father, but that's a choice she's made not to, and I respect it. But she came to me and asked me when it's mango season in Puerto Rico, and I had no idea. So I had no idea. So we went down a TripAdvisor rabbit hole. So this is that poem. So, when is mango season in Puerto Rico? A TripAdvisor question from Jack. And there's a response from the entire island of Vieques on TripAdvisor, apparently. And it's somewhere in Vieques, there's always a tree with fruit. You just need local knowledge. I have yet to see a mango tree in Kansas. I buy my fruit in a Whole Foods store. Most things here are from elsewhere. Even my jam travels into town. Do you know they grow a type of heaven in an orchard in a place called Santa Cruz? A mango spread, non-GMO, organic, 40 calories per tablespoon. It smells fleshy, like roadside mangoes, dropped from a tree, too ripe to grow, too old to save. There was a summer in Yabacoa where the street-side parking lots and driveways were paved in mangoes. We ate mango-flavored everything that summer. The taste of mangoes will make your eyes close. I ate my first gusano that July. I didn't mind. I never saw it. It was still bliss. Fruit flies are angels born in their own kind of heaven. For those who don't know, gusanos are worms, and you can't really tell what they taste like because they're eating mango. So you're eating something that's eating mango. Texture is similar. Being the first Latino Laureate came with its own pressure, I think, just from the brown community in general. And I do not speak for all of us. I never have. I know my story and only share my story, but also the stories of my friends that they share with me, that they trust me to share. And this poem is about a time that I went to Emporium. We're at the William Allen White House, and it was just interesting to walk into a space and not see anyone like me anywhere around the entire time I was there. So this is a poem maybe about that. Maybe I don't want to focus on troubles, face the longness of my days, all weather vane, circling in place. In me, immunity to dawn and dusk exists. I am always awake, so only know daydreams. Each day, we eat the light until only the bone of night is all that's left, then thrown away. I am part compass, part lost, part metal, all rooster. If you feel lost, focus on direction, not me. The sun is constant, the moon is fickle. I only know where whispers travel, the path of kites, the direction laughter leaves, where dandelion seeds still float, why leaves walk away, how long songs can fly, and the best times to ask flowers to dance. I am as useful as whim and pen and a cartographer's hand, lashing out, mapping out work I'm expected to do in front of strangers, seeing lines as paths to somewhere beautiful. But even a compass can be misplaced. This next poem is dedicated to a couple of my friends who are DACA recipients, dreamers, who every 2 years have to consider if they're going to be able to live, in this country, because they were brought as children, not by their own choice, just because their parents were looking for a better life for them, trying to be good parents. And it seems like every election cycle, this is up for grabs again. This poem is entitled La Humedad. La humedad is a reference to the humidity, the climate I believe we're living in, how difficult it can be to breathe. We would take trips to Kansas City, and in the car we'd listen to salsa merengue, and we get up there, and just for one day, we felt like we were surrounded by the cities that our parents grew up in, because the language was all Spanish, or Puerto Ricans, Panamanians, Mexicans, Hondurans, everyone was there. There's a lot of cologne, there was a lot of rum, it was a beautiful time, the music was great. But this poem is about that. This poem is about la humedad that some people exist in. At 1400 Main Street, I asked for una Cuba libre, sin hielo. Un Puerto Rico rico, otro Nuevo México, otro Venezuela, paz en Guatemala, paz en Panamá, y un Salvador para El Salvador y algo diferente para Argentina. Within the Chesterfield, I dance con música alegre, merengue, bachata y salsa. Acá bailamos to the rhythm of the son clave en la humedad, en esta humedad, en esta humedad, en esta humedad, en esta humedad. Because sitting, wishing, and waiting would be hopeless in the climate we can't breathe in. En esta humedad, en esta humedad, en esta humedad, en esta humedad. Y el clima puede afectar su dolor, but I won't suffer silently. Tears beat down my brow, cries come out in song, and worry turns and dips as we protest and dance with hand in hand la humedad. En esta humedad, en esta humedad, en esta humedad, en esta humedad. I get mixed feelings about the next poem I'm about to share. It's a very straightforward poem. I'm not hiding behind metaphor. I think sometimes simple truth should exist without meter and rhyme. Some may not consider it a poem, but I do. The words that are used to describe us really affect us. The term immigrant has been weaponized against a lot of us in places where they don't want us. And I've been looking for a new word for a long time, or a phrase that I could use for myself to describe myself. Because I believe those who define you also control you, and I would like to control my narrative. And this poem is entitled New American. Don't call me immigrant. I'm the new American, striving in New America as a new American. I'm not your invader, not an animal, no criminal. I am a just person, just striving in a new America. In New America, I'm a full-time student, overtime worker, volunteering in my free time, if I plan enough ahead for free time, if I can even afford the free time, if my free time is approved. I work hard in New America, Third shift warehouse, second shift my house, always on call, no days off, freelance for life, 4 jobs a week, blue and white collar. Don't call me immigrant. I'm the new American, surviving in New America as a new American. I am not your invader, not an animal, no criminal. I'm a just person, just surviving in a new America. This is new America. Student loans for all, high rent, higher utilities, low pay, rising healthcare costs, the cost of living deadly, no living wage, living in rage, my cousins in cage for wanting to live in a safer part of new America. Don't call me immigrant. I'm the new American living in new America as a new American. I'm not your invader, not an animal, no criminal. I'm a just person, just living in a new America. Strong and proud, able to withstand the distance I've traveled, the distance from my family, the distance between us, the distance in our dialects, the distance in our churches, the distance in our homes, the distance between my ancestors and my grandchildren, the distance from the streets to the dorm rooms, the distance from the field to the corner office suite. Don't call me immigrant. I'm the new American, dreaming of new America as a new American. I am not your invader, not an animal, no criminal. I'm a just person, just dreaming of a new America. Old America. Don't be afraid. We are all America, North America, Central America, South America. We are all Americans. We all strive in Americas. We all survive in Americas. We all live in Americas. They are all the same America. We all dream of a greater America. I want you to be paid a living wage, live in affordable housing without college debt or medical debt or credit card debt or national debt. I want no more racism. I am speaking of a new America. I am part of new America, whether you like it or not. So join me, please. Thank you. We're going to switch the order up. I think a lot about the poets who've reached high literary positions or recognition who are Latino, and to see them still writing about immigration and the border crisis and diaspora. I mean, all the way back to Julia de Burgos from Puerto Rico in the early 1900s, we're still writing the same work. And Martin Espada just wrote Floaters. Juan Felipe Herrera, first Latino U.S. Poet Laureate, wrote Every Day We Become More Illegal. This poem's entitled Todavía. Aquí, the street names may have changed, but we still feel the same. After all these years, after all these nights, after all these fights, after all this music, after all these songs, after all this singing, after all these words, I'm still writing lo mismo. What gets me through is love of family, love of community, the love I receive from my partner, from my child, from my pets, from my hobbies. This poem is a love poem. I think it's always important to acknowledge love. Examples. If the moon shattered and fell out the sky, I would gather its shards, build a mosaic of night so you may sleep and dream in peace. If the sun were to cool, I would dance ablaze in a dervish outside your window so the birds would chirp in the light of false mornings, waking you with love songs. If the sea disappeared, I'd lay mirrors on an ocean bed near the coastline so you could see the blue depths of my devotion and pick it up like sea glass whenever you choose. And if the wind were to stop, I'd whisper in your ear each day to remind you air can still move you. I do want to share a poem by Mary Oliver that I wrote after her passing called Remorse. She taught me grace through her poetry. You know, Wild Geese, I think about that poem, you know, you do not have to be good, that permission that she offered me. So I had to write a poem when she left, and I sit in my backyard and I think a lot, and I just stare at the lightning bugs, fireflies, you know, there's different ways of describing them. In death, we are embedded into earth, placed beneath dirt, blind to sky, hidden from our plots of light. How hard the fireflies work each night, transporting our souls from earth to universe, each spirit a filament, flickering as cargo until freed and released into ether. Last night, at twilight, I marked the flashes of cold light pulsing as Morse code. Let go, said the lightning bug, let go. I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time today, and I appreciate you sharing this space with me, so I'll read maybe. Oh, okay. We could do that too. Yeah, that'd be fine. Thank you, Emily. I originally wrote this poem called Same Old News after reading Pedro Pitri's poem, Puerto Rican Obituary. It's a poem I read after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, and I couldn't get in contact with my family. So I read his poem at a reading that day because I couldn't read my own work. It didn't feel appropriate. This poem feels relevant again because Fiona just passed through Puerto Rico recently, and again, people were without power, without water, sin luz and agua, is how we say it. Same old news. We still work. Sometimes we are late. We speak back when insulted. We still work. We take days off. We call into work. We go on strike. We still work 10 days a week, 2 jobs minimum, no overtime, still getting paid for only 5, for even less now. We still work. We work harder, much harder, get tired, show up late, call into work, then return to work, broken. We work and work and work and work. We work harder, much harder than before. Then we die broke, we die owing much more than before. We die more broken, we die much harder. Juan, Miguel, Milagros, Olga, Manuel are still dying. Juan is bribing local senators. Miguel lost the belt. Milagros disappeared. Olga sings of sadness. Manuel left for Broadway. They are all still dying. We die broken in hurricanes and earthquakes, sin luz y agua, in wars, from gunshots, in therapy, traumatized, on drugs and alcohol, alone, emotional and economic depressions are also tropical depressions. Let's talk about this. Aquí se habla Spanglish all the time. Aquí they put America first. Aquí they throw paper towels at us. Aquí they call us all Mexican. Aquí they call everyone immigrant. Aquí we are all the same. Aquí we are all non-white. Aquí we are only brown. Aquí we are the other. Aquí to be called Latino is to be unwelcomed. It's like I'm in a marathon or something. Got cups of water and stuff. This poem's entitled Promesas, Promises. It's one of those moments where I try to use poetry as prayer or a mantra, or a way of opening possibility, speaking something into being. The first line is in Spanish. It's the same line over and over. It's llamero llaneros, which means any minute now, plainsmen. Before I became Poet Laureate, I was working at a hotel. I was a glorified janitor, and I worked with housekeeping, and I was really into my poetry, so I didn't always get things fixed in a timely manner as a handyman, and I'd always say, llamero, in a minute I'll get it done. So this poem is for them who always fed me when things were difficult. Along the way, they always brought extra food to work for me, and it was very motherly of them to do. Llamero llaneros, it won't always be this hard. Llamero llaneros, they will embrace us. Llamero llaneros, they will not fear us. Llamero llaneros, they will accept us. Llamero llaneros, they will respect us. Llamero llaneros, they will not fight us. Llamero llaneros, they will not attack us. Llamero llaneros, they will not encage us. Llamero llaneros, we will not be separated. Llamero llaneros, they will not divide us. Llamero llaneros, they will not send us back to die. Llamero llaneros, we will be welcomed. Llamero llaneros, we will live in peace. Llamero llaneros, they will see us as equals. Llamero llaneros, we will be appreciated. Llamero llaneros, they will call us family. Llamero llaneros, they will love us. Llamero llaneros, they will not hate us. Llamero llaneros, it will all be over soon. Llamero llaneros, we will forgive each other. I have a poem about birds and the way they sound like car alarms. And I say that it's a reminder that even things locked up can be stolen. So, per aspera ad astras, the next poem has been anthologized a lot, and it's about me finding place and home. I'll read that poem, and I'll end with Un mango grows in Kansas. Thank you for your time. We were lost in the plains, beautiful and ordinary. Sunflowers in the fields, seeds of fallen stars, standing tall, deeply rooted in this land. I've admired how our flowers shine, grasping towards the sky, beyond the prairie grass, anchored down to earth, mimicking the sun. When a gardener plants the seeds of helianthus, they are performing magic, raising stars out of the dust where buzzing planets circle, half red moons set, and swarming comets float in orange comas. I've always felt that late at night in the bed of a truck in a Kansas field, we were at the center of this universe, and I was exactly where I should be, amongst the flowers, not below. Un mango grows in Kansas. You have found me, hidden in a wheat field, within a husk of corn, growing for you. I am ready. Pick me. Hold me in your hands, remove my skin, peel away my color, find that I am tender, soft, and sweet. Eat of me. until there is nothing and your mouths are empty and your bellies filled. What is left will live as seed to grow, again, brighter, hardened, and less bitter. Thank you.
Thought I heard my name. That's hard to follow. Thanks, Huascar. That was good. You did it. Thank you for this. We'll see how this goes. I wanted to start by checking in on you all. I'm curious. I invited you on Friday night and again on Saturday morning to experience these days and these people who have shared themselves with us. So I'm going to invite you again to raise your hand or give out a call, maybe a howl, if you experienced the following over the last few days: discomfort, joy, conflict. Yeah, that's good. Connection. There's no wrong answers, people. Fear, despair, comfort, movement, grief, enlightenment, and emergence. So thank you for taking my survey. Well, we might be sending out a survey. I don't know if we're going to do that, but this is a good start. And I think if you've experienced any of that, then we were successful here today. So thank you for making that happen. Yes, thank you. I wanted to also remind you, in case any of you weren't here early yesterday, that I am Rachel, the non-scientist president of a scientific organization. I'm not here to say anything smart or provide you any well-cited presentation. I'm here to alchemize what we've experienced together and to help solidify some of it. I'm going to just process it for myself here in front of you. So thank you for letting me do that. And letting me do that. And I wanted to acknowledge that for those listening online, or for those who might watch this in the future, that what I'm going to talk about is woven from something that's no longer here. It's woven from the folks who have been on stage over the course of these hours and these days, and the music and the art, which wasn't recorded and isn't available online, but you can certainly go listen to our invited guests and our speakers and hear their words and maybe get a glimpse of what it is exactly that I'm talking about. So I wanted to start by sharing with you some of the unthinkable things I've heard over these days. We live in this context, and Wes talks about us being out of context, and Tim talked about the context of the last 2 years. And there is a sense, and what I often grieve is how unbearable truly it is. So, the unthinkable thoughts. There are only 200 some black farmers in the entire state of Missouri. Our agricultural system maintains barriers to entry for black and indigenous farmers, limiting access to land and the financial tools necessary to build a life on the land and to grow the food that we all need to survive. We put 1 pound of weed killer per person per year on our food. Is that right? Close. He went like this. I'm going to get these all kind of right, so that's the other thing. You're going to have to go back and read the notes. There is glyphosate in the urine of about 80% of Americans and in 75% of our waterways. I'm looking for a nod. Our Palestinian collaborators traverse dozens of hostile checkpoints to reach their research sites. 50% of our topsoil has been lost in the last 100 years. We are disconnected from our food and from the land that we live on. There are many who are not at the table, they're on the menu. Fascism, too many people, birds plunging from the sky in Mexico, the failure of success, being defined and controlled by others, working under a breaking load and dying. And this isn't even including the headlines that we see every day outside of this barn. The International Panel on Climate Change saying that the climate is changing faster than previously projected, communities across the globe being devastated by this change. We exist in an economic and social system that we're built on and now depend on inequality, slavery, and violence. Our food system stands on a most fragile footing. Our political system in the US is stretching to the extremes on both sides, to the point of ripping the very fabric of our democracy in half. And we're in the midst of a sixth extinction event, approaching a lonely planetary future that may or may not include humans. So, it's a lot. This is our context. It could be apocalyptic, or maybe not quite. And so, but it is certainly unbearable and incomprehensible. And so we have this knot. We're in this situation, we want to solve it. Wes says to head things off. We want to head this thing off. Well, what is this thing? And one of the things I was even more depressing recently is that I realized that this thing is this ball of twine that you all made. It is actually quite beautiful, but I can't solve it. There is no solution, there's no one solution. It's complex. The complexity held within just one human, people who have shared so vulnerably with us this weekend, the complexity of spanning 2 fertile crescents, the complexity of being black and a farmer in the US, the complexity of a Latino poet laureate of and for Kansas, the complexity of a French, Vietnamese, Texan living in Boston, today in Kansas for the first time, the complexity of indigenous persistence through genocide and in some cases extinction, the complexity and delicacy of our food system, and the scale of this ball. The scale that then you take all of those individual personal complexities and you take it times 8 billion. and all of the histories of our culture and society here on the prairie, the violent and unjust histories and the beautiful ones, the wondrous and devastating diversity of our stories and how they collide and emerge and evolve over time. The revolutions, the Renaissance, the Green Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the Internet, the generations, now each named and with their own culture, the greatest, the silent, boomers, Gen X, millennials, Z, and now Alpha. And the knot is tight. It's guarded fiercely by entrenched and powerful interests who prefer it stay just like it is. We here at the Land Institute have said probably over the last 6 months, more times than there are people in this barn, this phrase: the cascading social and ecological crises of our time. Cascading because this crisis, this intertwined, complex, and impossible crisis, is rolling down, cascading, picking up steam faster than we can take at an alarming pace. And there's no single solution to the puzzle. So, I was grappling with this and trying to figure out what to say to you all today. And there's a man here by the name of Bob Berkebile, and he taught me to change my perspective. So, and there's a great image of Bob on a beach somewhere, literally standing on his head. I'd like to just invite, if you're out on the lawn and you're able enough, you can take this moment to go ahead and stand on your head. Don't do it up here in the front, that'll just be tragic. But if this ball, this knot, and it's all of its complexity, is rolling down a hill at greater and greater speed, what is the problem? What if the problem isn't the fact that it's rolling down? What if down is, oh, there's a handstand, there's a headstand. Would you like to come finish my presentation? Because you probably can do it better than I. So my notes are a mess here. We're just gonna. So what if the problem isn't the down? And what if the problem isn't the entanglement, the complexity? What if the only problem is the speed? What a relief. We don't have to stop it, and we don't even have to push it back up the hill. All we have to do is find the grace and the movement to help it slow down and release the tension and the tightness and the power of the hold that is protecting it. So I'm going to switch metaphors from your beautiful knot. Metaphors are useful, but only for a short period of time. And I'm going to revert back to this, my favorite prairie plant. And you see it here, the feathery top of it. And you can't see what's under it, and maybe that's part of our problem. And so what I imagine now, and Aubrey helped us visualize the root imagery that we use here at the Land Institute. What if this knot and all of its speed becomes more like a root? It grows arms and it starts to crawl, more slowly but still connected, learning all along, learning how to see remnants, to discern the remnants that are necessary, it makes me think of the two things that other people have said. One is Aubrey suggesting that we might consider these roots and their movement, roots with the power to break concrete. And I think also of the olive trees that live and die and persist over centuries. Those are the kind of roots. This is the kind of movement that I imagine in this. So, how do we get there? How do we grow these new roots? Well, Tim gave us the Smill versus Jackson and Jensen bit yesterday, and I'm going to go, because I work with plant breeders and I know what this means, I'm going to go with the hybrid approach, the both-and approach, that we have to simultaneously go slowly towards where we're heading and have large bursts of revolution and change. We definitely need to get comfortable with change, get comfortable with grief, and get comfortable with emergence. We're infants in this evolutionary timescale. Despite the narrative we've developed over the last few hundred years, we have not arrived. In fact, the idea of arriving or achieving some ultimate form of happiness, success, achievement, I think is folly. All we can really do is continually change. So if we slow down, slowing down means milling about, finding time to see the cicada, hear the bird that Paul Winter heard that I couldn't remember. The wood thrush, thank you. Hearing the wood thrush, feeling the feathery tips of the prairie grass through your fingers, paying attention to the wonder and knowledge that our bodies are made of stardust. And we need to develop new roots. This beautiful thing that's happening right now, a layering of perspectives and lived experiences, a layering like the laying down of fresh soil on the geological map of our ecosphere. I think we get down gracefully through acts of loosening. Political acts, a signature on a letter, a vote from a congressperson or 75, building knowledge together, raising voices previously unheard. We get down gracefully, also, as I said, through radical thrusts towards the improbable, by having the courage to pursue remnants that cannot be actualized in our lifetime. We get down gracefully through the movement of art and poetry and music, through our difference and bridging across it, by creating a sort of pluralistic culture that allows for ecospheric innovation, which we call emergence. We get there by learning to discern the remnants, to pack our bag for the journey. We only get to take so much with us. We have to choose carefully what we put in our bag. We have to act decent, stay rested, explore, and challenge. And I think, actually, I know I would go that far, that we can do it. We kind of don't have a choice. The proof that under the trauma of the storm up here. Proof that new roots are growing in places where we can't see it. For starters, this: Huascar, Alexia, Stan, Wes, Eric, I'm missing a bunch. Donna, Janella, Ryan, thank you. Just keep going, Webb. For starters, all of these people are proof that we can do it. I can also tell you that there is a national and international research community that is working to develop new perennial grain crops and societies to steward and be nourished by them in places including, I will take a deep breath, California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, Utah, Wisconsin, and beyond that, Argentina, Australia, Bulgaria, China, Laos, Vietnam, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Kazakhstan, the Netherlands, Palestine, Russia, Scotland, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Tunisia, Ukraine, Uganda, Mali, the United Kingdom, and I'm sure I missed at least 5. I know this is possible because right now there are potential future perennial grain researchers and farmers in the Ukraine listening to this stage. They are doing it while their land is destroyed and occupied in a war that they are fighting for their lives. I know this is possible because of you, because of what we've done over the weekend. I know it's possible because of Leland Lawrence, whose shack you can go visit over yonder, lived on $500 a year, a beautiful, introspective, and thriving life. I know this is possible because of the countless seemingly small acts that occasionally explode into massive change. So, what are we at the Land Institute going to do about all this? Well, we're going to continue to invite, learn, and connect with diverse voices and movements. We're going to persist in our development of perennial grains. We're going to catalyze and support the perennial grains and perennial futures in hubs like the Fertile Crescent that are deeply rooted in their place, resilient to the impacts of our changing context, and connected by an open source, accessible network of knowledge, data, stories, and care. We're going to continue to explore the ecosphere for new clues and new emergence and new ways for these roots to move down quickly and slowly, now and over deep time. So I will end with an invitation. I invite you again, beyond today, to learn to find new clues, to learn to see and discern remnants, to pack your bag, to help your neighbors pack theirs, and to be moved by the remnants. I invite you to continue to dance and to sing, and for those of you who were here last night, again, to howl by the light of the moon, to be moved by the remnants of a prairie fire transferred to pulp, if you've seen the art in the gallery, and to work toward growing your own roots, to gain access to that little human animal inside you, because it knows the way. and it is sometimes hidden and invisible, just like the roots of this prairie. So good luck with all of that. I'd also like to express gratitude to the speakers over the weekend who brought their vulnerability to this stage, shared their lives' work and their visions of the future with us. I'd also like to take a moment and thank those who are not with us. We've lost folks recently at the Land Institute, and this stage has been graced over time with folks who are no longer with us. So for their contributions and involvement and their continued energies, we are forever thankful. Thank you to Emily Ryan and Merrick's Gustafson, who helped coordinate the program and this event. Thank you to the staff who make the work happen every day and inspire me every day and give me the energy to stand up here and for making this event happen. Hi, Amanda. And finally, thank you to you all for being here. Thank you to those online who are listening in your own place. The same goes for you. You can find those roots. They're there. We just have to see them. And I was so moved. I've been so moved by this entire thing. So thank you for that. I was so moved by Huascar, and he has such a essence about him and a way of being that I think it's most appropriate that he get the last word. So I'm going to ask him to come up and close us out.
The only theater I've never done is improv. Okay. My term is ending. The position of the Poet Laureate will have a 4-year term next. I hope you invite them. I hope you invite more art into these conversations, because when we talk through art, when we communicate through art, we're speaking with a bit more grace and beauty than we normally would experience in a conversation. The work I will be doing next will be regionally, at a state level, federally, and at a local art agency, because I think all movements are grassroots movements, and we have to trickle up and not down when it comes to that. So people ask why I do poetry, and I often, especially this past month, has been thinking about a very particular poem, a very short poem, and I like short poems because my memory is horrible. So, and that poem is by Sean Thomas Doherty. It's from the second O in Sorrow, and it's titled, Why Bother? Because right now, there's someone out there with a wound, the exact shape of your words. Thank you.